My grandson's wedding tagged me. The forgotten Crone and a hot mic added she just writes checks. I felt the sting, but years of keeping families afloat taught me to steady my hands before I steady a room. So I adjusted the badge, walked to the back office, and let paper do what pride can't I, pulled time-stamped records, and began a quiet trail no toast could erase. That was only the first turn. What followed would prove who I was not, who they staged me to be. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I arrived at the Ludlow Grand with my knees behaving like stubborn hinges, but my blouse lay smooth and my pearls sat where they should. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and lilies. Glass trembled overhead in a chandelier the size of a small moon, throwing slow light over marble and shoes. I pressed the clasp on my handbag just to feel it answer. Today was about witnessing my grandson become a husband, not about me. I told myself that twice the way a bookkeeper checks a column, then checks it again. If they forget my name, I will not forget the facts. I breathed, counted 3 heartbeats, and stepped toward the door. My fingers still remembered how to be steady. At the check-in table, a young attendant slid a badge toward me without looking up. The sticker letters were neat and cruel. The Forgotten Crone. A man paused, mistook me for staff, and asked where the coat room was. "My apologies," I said, keeping my voice level. "Try the concierge." I lifted the badge. It was light as paper and heavy as a verdict. My smile held. Observation before protest, I reminded myself. I pinned the edge of the lanyard flat so it would not twist a small act of order. The seating chart stood on an easel like a courtroom exhibit. I found families clustered like constellations. My name was not among them. A small placeholder card clipped low pointed me to a number far from the dance floor behind a tower of white hydrangeas, meant for photographs. I traced the logic with my finger in the air, who sits where, for the toast the camera the story told later. Belonging arranged for optics, not for blood. It stung, but the sting helped me think. Silence is not surrender, I told myself. Silence is storage. The font bloomed in soft gold for the bride's family, in silver for the groom's. My line was a thin gray nobody bothered to embolden. A small arrow sticker nudged me toward the back. I thought about photos I had framed over years, how many included me only at the edge of the couch, half a shoulder, half a smile. 2 bridesmaids in tulle drifted past. One looked through me, all smooth gloss and hurry. A guest pressed a program into my hand and asked if I could fetch more from the foyer cabinet. I said, "I'm a guest as well." My posture stayed tall. "The staff can help you at the desk." The words tasted like mint and metal. I set the program down for whoever needed it next and steadied my breath. At the planner's counter, a tablet lay angled toward the ceiling. While she turned to adjust a ribbon, the screen brightened and lines of notes scrolled. Under a header with today's date and timestamp, I read minimal interaction. Keep grandmother off stage, seat away from head table, steer to extended connections. I did not gasp. I counted the bullets as if they were receipts. Words have edges, and these had been sharpened. I pictured them cutting me into the shape of a decoration. I filed the phrasing in my head the way I used to file invoices, precise, retrievable. The planner came back and smiled the way people smile when their shoes hurt. She thanked a groomsman for moving a box and never once met my eyes. That helped oddly. Indifference is easier to catalog than malice. I clicked my pen and wrote the phrasing on a place card in my purse, copying it, letter for letter. The mezzanine business center hummed with the soft, useful sound of printers. I asked for a quick QR reprint because my phone was being fussy. The clerk nodded and pulled up the check-in log. On the preview creation time and user hung in tidy gray. "Would you mind printing the details? My eyes do better on paper," I said. He handed me 2 pages. I fed one through the stapler spine, neat against cardstock. The pages went into my slim folder under the flap I had mended last week with transparent tape. If I'm invisible to them, I thought then the paper will see me. Evidence before emotion. I dated the corner in small print the way I used to date deposit slips. The habits that kept a school solvent are the same habits that keep a woman whole. I slid a pen loop over the folder so nothing could fall out when I stood. Back in the foyer, I set my shoulders as if I were balancing a book on my head, the trick we taught nervous second graders before a recital. I straightened the badge on my lapel, not to hide it, but to remember what it said. People flowed around me in satin currents. Some met my eyes and softened. Others bounced away like rain from wax. I counted not to keep score, but to keep calm. Waiting is a skill, and I have earned mine. A child in patent shoes spun near the staircase and laughed. I tightened the clasp of my handbag and let the seconds lengthen with the lobby clock. I walked toward the ballroom doors. The chandeliers ahead trembled with laughter. A photo booth screen flickered to life, sliding through childhood's on loop. My folder felt heavier than it looked. I was not walking in to be saved. I was walking in to record, to stand where I was placed, and to remember exactly who put me there. The ushers tested microphones beyond the doors, a hollow pop and a cheer. From somewhere to my left, someone said my grandson's name, and then a story I had told him once about kites. The laugh line landed without me. That too I filed. I set my feet the way my late husband taught me when the world seemed to tilt, heel-toe lift so balance arrives on time. I promised myself memory would do the work now. I won't fade. I crossed the ballroom threshold with my breath leveled and my jaw easy, letting the chandeliers hum like beehives above a field of linen. The band tested a warm chord. Glassware ticked as if marking time. My place waited in the back, a table skirted in white and guarded by a pillar of hydrangeas that would slice my view all night. I took the chair without fuss, set my handbag by my ankle, and folded my hands on the cloth. Quiet hurt travels better when it has posture. I reminded myself I was here to witness, even if witnessing meant watching around leaves and tall vases that bloomed between me and my grandson's vows. I sat as a ledger line. I rose to sign the guest book near the door, a thick album dressed in pale cloth. The hotel pen scratched a timid gray that vanished against the creamy page. I reached into my bag for my own dark ink and wrote my name, slowly. The loops deliberate the date exact. Proof that I existed in this room at this hour. A couple behind me whispered about keeping the wedding's brand consistent, about colors and fonts, and a grid for posts. Their words slid into my pocket like receipts. I closed the book and smoothed the ribbon, then returned to my chair, letting the act of signing weigh more than the distance they'd placed between me and the stage. Firm. The first montage rolled across twin screens, baby cheeks, bath time crowns, scraped knees, cardboard forts, summers at a lake bright as a coin. The room breathed in unison O's, lifting through the dark. Birthday candles, a paper rocket, a science fair ribbon, a gap-toothed grin. Winter mornings, too. Someone's kitchen, someone's cocoa. Not my kitchen, not my mugs, not the winters he spent in my one bedroom when his parents were too busy quarreling to notice the weather. I watched carefully, palms folded, feeling the ache of being edited out of a life I helped hold together. When applause fluttered, I kept my hands still. I learned that clapping can blur the count, and I needed the count. The second reel answered the first with polished years' graduations, internships, date nights in restaurants trimmed with brass lamps. I knew those drapes on the wall. I had paid 3 months of them so he could sleep near downtown during his first job. My name was nowhere as intended. A hand squeezed my shoulder in memory, only me at the stove, with spaghetti him sketching on junk mail. The screen said the village was elsewhere. I murmured quietly that they had curated a life while I had balanced the ledger. The sentence didn't bite. It sat in my mouth like nickel I refused to spend. I straightened my back and let the pictures pass. The hydrangea pillar swayed each time nearby tables leaned into laughter. Blotting the screens, I anchored my mind by counting what could not ignore me. Exit signs 3. Server stations 2. The side door 30 paces if I kept left of the aisle. A server paused by my chair with a tray, smiled past me, and served the table ahead. My badge scraped my collarbone when I breathed the rim, whispering their word. I let the scratch teach patience. I thought of school ledgers, columns balance when someone decides to be exact. This would be like that numbers times and keeping my own account. A bridesmaid's laugh crossed. The tower nodded. I inched my chair, reclaimed a sliver of screen, and watched my grandson lift a glass I had not poured. Controlled anger rose. I decanted it into stillness and let stillness say what my family no longer hears. I kept the count. It kept me steadier than pride. Near the stage, the bridesmaid bent toward the standing mic, practicing a line meant to sound spontaneous. Her whisper skated along an ambient feed I could hear from a side speaker, a hairline leak in the soundboard. Laughter ruffled the head table. The tech at the console held up one finger, then pointed at his watch and mouthed a countdown. I narrowed my attention until it felt like threading a needle. The cable snake coiled under the riser. Red light on the preamp, the tremor in her hand as she rehearsed gratitude. She leaned closer, breath warming the mesh. It was ordinary, and in it, I felt the trap carelessness in charm. I fixed my gaze on the board and waited, letting the roar of the room fall back to a low current. I have learned over years of being talked over that patience is an instrument. Well, then the carelessness spoke for itself. The mic stayed live long enough to carry one clean sentence as crisp as glass in water. She just writes checks. It glided from the speakers to the back tables and landed in my lap like a folded bill. A few heads turned surprised to find me where they had placed me. I kept my posture even and my gaze forward. In another life, I might have stood. In this one, I learned something better. I let the words settle, weigh them, and put them in the folder where I keep facts. Breath in, breath out. What is said in a room is part of the room. What you record is yours to use when the time is kind. The speaker line went quiet. Chatter rushed back to fill the space it left. I returned to my seat and felt the guestbook's impression under my palm. Their slideshow had no room for me. The page did. I tucked that thought beside the hot mic sentence and fastened the folder. I would decide when to leave and why and how the leaving would read when someone looked at the record. Strategy is a kind of mercy. It keeps you from saying what anger would waste. Applause lifted like a tide behind me as I slipped through the side door and into the lemon-clean corridor. The soundproofing muted the band to a soft heartbeat. I kept my shoulders square, the badge at my collar, scratching a steady reminder against my skin. I did not cover it. I breathed once, twice, and measured my steps by the floor's discreet arrows. I wasn't leaving the night. I was stepping into its spine. A brushed steel placard read, "Event Office." I pressed my palm to the cool metal and gathered the language I would need, short, neutral, exact. A house phone sat on a shelf outside the door. I lifted the receiver and asked for the manager on duty. Minutes later, he arrived compact, crisp suit eyes that counted things before they judged them. "Ira Beaumont," he said. I matched his professional half-smile. "Maris Delaney," I replied. "Family elder seated in the far section. I'm looking for clarity about the gift table, specifically how cash gifts are being routed tonight." My voice kept to the ledgers of my old life, even factual patient. The office held a terminal, a small printer, and the warm scent of toner. Ira angled the monitor so I could see. "Venue policy is neutral," he said. "We don't touch cards or cash placed in the acrylic box. Anything with a QR code goes to a third-party fund the planner set up. The venue isn't a party to it." "May I view the wording guests see?" I asked, and the event order referencing that fund. He considered for a breath, then nodded. "Public materials you may review. Internal contracts you may not." It was the right answer. We walked to the ballroom entrance and stopped at the gift station just inside the doors. Votive candles smudged light against the acrylic sign for the couple cash fund. I pulled my phone, the one a bridesmaid had called adorable, and scanned the code. A clean page opened tasteful banner progress bar and a gentle promise that every dollar supports the newlyweds. At the bottom in letters meant for lawyers and insomniacs, a footer managed by Kincaid Media. I tapped the small About Beneficiary link, the one no one clicks when champagne is close. A pane of policy appeared, funds processed through an account administered by Kincaid Media, settlement to the family representative designated by the event client. Processing times may vary. Platform reserves the right to deduct service fees. No names, no direct deposit to Rowan or Celine. A funnel with more hands than a receiving line. I angled the phone so the ballroom Wi-Fi name sat clearly on the screen and took screenshots with the time in the corner, then saved them to a folder called Wedding Receipts. Back in the office, Ira called accounting. A man named Dorian arrived with the focus of a metronome. He greeted me with a polite nod and turned to the monitor. I set my folder down and slid the print I'd made earlier, the check-in QR with its creator stamp beside my phone's fresh images. Paper next to paper steadied my hands. "We can't police the couple's fun," Dorian said, "but we can clarify the venue's role." Ira typed while he spoke. "We'll place a neutral placard at the station. Third-party cash fund managed off-site. Venue not a party. We'll also ask the planner to add transparent wording on the page. Please send me an email confirming that request was made," I said, with time and event code. While Ira drafted the clarification, I stood by the little printer, feeling its hum settle into my forearm. Winter returned the year Rowan's father left us between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I balanced the school's books by day and our pantry by night. I learned then that love is not loud. Love is arithmetic. It's the extra column for cleats he outgrew too fast, the overtime for the band trip he swore he didn't need until he needed it. If their slideshow prefers sunsets, fine. The ledger will keep the weather records. The printer clicked and fed out 2 pages. Ira handed one to me and filed the other. An email pinged my phone seconds later, a brief memo with the event code, the language placed at the station, and the timestamp. Dorian added the line that matters when the music fades. "Final settlement and responsible party per contract," he said. "Close out at 11:58 with the planner of record." He looked up. "That means the invoice, service charge, everything. My thanks were simple. Precision deserves simple thanks." Before I moved, Ira confirmed he would log and loop the planner. Dorian cued a note to audit the fund footer at closeout. I set alarms on my phone for 11:53 and 11:57. Safeguards are old friends tonight. We stepped back into the corridor. Heat from the ballroom spilled through the seam of the door. The band had found a groove that made people forgive their shoes. A busser swept by with an empty tray and a smile he didn't owe me. I nodded and stood still long enough to feel the difference between anger and aim. Anger scatters. Aim gathers. Tonight needed gathering. I checked the badge once, not to hide it, but to ensure the pin held. I squared the folder in my hand like a book I meant to keep. If they called the fun for the couple, the clock would call it by its truer name at 11:58, when totals replace toasts. I have lived most of my life at the moment where numbers decide what nights become. I would live there again for one more hour, for one more page of proof. I reached the admin office at 11:15, the hallway humming with dish racks and the distant thrum of a bass line. Steam curled from a cart as a server wheeled past. My badge scratched my collarbone, with each step a small metronome that kept me honest. Dorian sat beneath a wall clock, sleeves rolled, glasses low. Ira stood beside him, hands folded like bookends. I set my folder down and kept my voice level. Tonight would be about pages, not please. "We can review close out now," Dorian said. "Your ID, please." I passed it across. He compared birth dates, checked the folio number, and pulled up the contract. Ira read the header aloud, neutral as granite. "Responsible party Graham Voss family. Adjustment allowed at final tally with manager cosign." Nothing theatrical in his tone. Policy never needs a spotlight. I nodded once. "Then let's simply reflect what's written." He itemized while the clock counted down. Ballroom rental, catering overage, AV extension, floral relocation, service, and tax. The numbers arrived like steady footfalls. I followed with my pen, making one correction on a duplicate linen entry. Dorian erased re-entered and showed the revised subtotal without a sigh. Old ledger nights came back to me, radiator hissing, Henry alive, then our boy asleep down the hall, while I balanced columns so birthdays could be easy later. If love rarely shows on a stage, it does appear in arithmetic. 1157. Ira keyed his cosign. Dorian clicked, finalize. The laser printer woke with a purr that always makes sense to me, a machine turning decisions into something you can hold. Warm toner, dry paper, no speeches, no violins. I watched the feed tray as if it were a tiny proscenium. The clock hand hopped forward. At 11:58, the first page slid out. Final invoice bottom corner. Time 11:58 p.m. In the box no one mentions in toasts, the line read exactly as the contract had promised. Responsible party Graham Voss. Family. My breath left in a clean line. Dorian stapled the packet and placed a duplicate beside it. Ira initialed the adjustment log and asked for an email address. I spelled it once. A ping landed in my purse like a small anchor. I tucked the copy into my folder and kept the original face up. Paper not pride would do the heavy lifting. I stepped back into the service corridor. Stainless walls reflected me as a thin ribbon of blue silk with a stubborn spine. The kitchen door alcove held a narrow shelf cool as a winter rail. I laid the invoice there. Then I removed my badge, looked at it for the space of one breath, and set it beside the packet. The forgotten Crone. Letters neat and ugly. I did not flinch. Let words keep the company they deserve. Footsteps. Vera's perfume arrived before she did crisp and citrus. Graham followed jacket, unbuttoned tie, loosened eyes hot with a worry he would call optics. They stopped when they saw the packet. Accounting texted, he said, already defensive. Vera reached. I tapped the staple with my pen. 11:58, I said. Time is honest even when people aren't. She froze, then smiled the way a camera expects. Mother, we could have handled this gracefully. Grace isn't a substitute for a ledger, I answered. Graham opened his hands as if the air owed him something. You know how these nights work. Settlements, reimbursements. I know how contracts work, I said. And I know how my name was used when a fund needed credibility and erased when a slideshow needed a cleaner line. His mouth closed around nothing. The hum of dish machines filled the pause. You're making a scene in a hallway. Vera tried again, softer. No, I said, lowering my voice farther than hers. I'm ending one. Paper speaks. Tonight it speaks clearly. I slid the packet toward them and lifted my duplicate. Graham's fingers hovered, then landed on the page as if it were warmer than it looked. This will embarrass Rowan, he said. I am not optics, I replied. The sentence surprised him. It did not surprise me. I repinned the badge to my dress not to wear the insult, but to mark the place I had left it. I gathered my folder, checked that the email had arrived, and stepped past them toward the cooler air. Dorian's printer hummed again somewhere behind me, loyal as a train on schedule. Dignity doesn't need an audience. It needs a record. They built a night of images. I printed a night of facts. I did not wait for them to reply. The corridor held its metallic cool and the clatter from the banquet station ebbed. Through a porthole window, I saw the band count off. Couples raised glasses, unaware the night had chosen its headline. I checked the email PDF attached. I forwarded it to archive and to a friend who never asks for gossip. Habit from petty cash days, make a second copy. I slipped the duplicate into my inner pocket and smoothed my lapel. The badge rested at my collarbone marker. You were here when you decided not to vanish. There would be no scene, only the turn of a key in a lock that had been stuck for years. Whatever story they curated in that ballroom mine would not be curated out. In the service foyer, the photographer hurried by. He nodded. I nodded back. People doing their jobs. Let everyone do theirs. Mine tonight was simple: preserve the trail, hold the line, and leave on my feet. The chandeliers hummed as I angled toward the side exit. If anyone asked where I had been, I would say, in the part of the hotel where records live. I re-entered the ballroom with the printer's hum in my ears. Laughter skimmed the ceiling like steam that refused to settle. The band tested a velvet chord, glasses chimed, servers drifted in tidy arcs. I took my same back table, the one the flowers tried to erase, and didn't bend the arrangement aside. I didn't ask to be moved. I let the room keep its picture. In my lap, the folder was a steadier kind of spotlight. Paper has weight when you've lived by ledgers. I set my hands over it and breathed. Tonight wasn't about being seen. It was about what could be shown while the music covered a page. Earlier at 8:40, the MC shuffled his stack and flipped the top card too casually. For a heartbeat, the back page faced the room. The words were printed in thick, practical font, the way you label a storage bin, keep grandma off stage. Minimal interaction. 2 rows ahead, a woman's mouth made a round O. The MC paled, coughed a joke about stage directions, and tucked the card away as if paper forgets what it shows. Paper doesn't forget. The band filled the pause with a trill. The screens kept breathing light. I felt the sentence sit down beside me, uninvited, unmistakable. No one came to take it back. Around us, napkins were folded like flags at attention. But that line wrinkled the night in a way no starch could smooth. Calm. The room heard and pretended it hadn't. Head table smiles tightened like shoes, half a size too small. Bridesmaids smoothed fabric already smooth. A man near the aisle glanced at me, then at the floral pillar as if the flowers were guilty. I did not raise a hand or ask to respond. I've worked where mistakes walk the halls before apologies do. So I kept the silence and filed the words like totals, slow, exact, ready. My badge scratched my collarbone, a metronome for waiting. I noted who laughed loudly, who studied their glass, who checked the exits. Truth, when it leaks, shows you where everyone stands. I wrote nothing. Room wrote itself. At 12:20, with the invoice cooling in my folder, I opened my phone and forwarded what I had saved, the QR log screenshots of the cash fund page and a discrete photo of the MC's slipped card. Subject line, on-brand directive, displayed in ballroom. I sent it to Patricia Wynne, whose letters land straight. I asked for a narrow, factual note, retain the cue cards, and clarify the fund wording. I pressed send and watched the message slide out over the hotel Wi-Fi like a boat leaving harbor. I'm not chasing scenes. I'm chasing records that outlast them. The folder warmed my knees. Beyond the flowers, a toast cracked into laughter. I saved copies in a labeled note, checked my battery, folded my hands, and waited for the reply I knew would come. Replies move as tide. Moon favored me. Patricia replied faster than coffee cools. Her email carried a letter on firm stationery and a short chain through a vendor alias. In the highlighted line, the phrase sat plain as a label on a jar. She isn't on brand for the family narrative. The letter asked the venue to preserve stage materials from tonight and the planner's office to correct the posted wording for the fund. She copied management, the planner, and me. The CC line glowed like porch lights left on. No flourish, no threat, only dates, times, and verbs that stand up in daylight. I read it twice. My breathing evened. Cruelty can be tidy. Their tidiness gave me clarity. I saved the PDF, reopened the chain, and noted the stamps who wrote it, who forwarded it, which device sent it to the print packet. Paper tells on you when you make it do your hiding, tidy enough to trace it. Oh, a few minutes later, Ira walked the neutral placard to the gift station. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The sign was simple. Third-party cash fund is managed off-site. Venue is not a party. Please see posted terms. A young couple read it, exchanged a glance, and slipped their envelope into the locked card box instead. No debate followed. The river of guests adjusted its course by inches and kept moving toward the cake. A mother in blue paused, tapped the notice once, then nodded. Quiet corrections travel farther than speeches. From my seat, I watched the placard turn habit back into choice, one envelope at a time. It steadied me. Yes, optics tried to find their footing. Vera lifted the order of toasts with a smile, pressed flat at the corners. Graham consulted the side tech table as if knobs could soften a sentence already loose in the air. Rowan touched his cufflinks and laughed loudly. I didn't move. Paper had entered the room and speaks slowly then, all at once. I kept my eyes on the perimeter exit servers the way staff listen when truth has a sound check of its own. People think control is volume. I've learned it is a list, a clock, a copy, saved twice. Vera's gaze skimmed past me as if I were negative space. That was fine. Negative space makes the subject visible. I opened Patricia's letter again and read the clean lines the way you read a map after years of driving by instinct. This wasn't my voice. It was theirs, fixed in header and time. In a night of curated images, the document had no filter and no blush. I didn't need a microphone. I needed a record that would still be legible long after the flowers browned. I closed the file and set the phone face down. Facts could speak now. I was finished being the only witness. Records don't pretend. True. I stood in the shadow of the side tech table, the music thinning to a late-hour shimmer. The room smelled of roses, spilled Prosecco, and warm cables. I opened my mail app and titled a new thread, Event Documentation Preservation and Notice. My fingers were steady. I attached 4 exhibits with names I would remember in the morning. QR check-in log 1912 PDF, cash fund footer screens, 2037.jpit card back 2040.jpit council letter not on brand, diu PDF, no adjectives, no speeches, only nouns and clocks. I paused, checked each file name twice, then saved the draft the way I used to set aside deposit slips until the numbers cooled. Recipients mattered. They always had when I did lunch counts and field trip money at the school. I entered the manager's address, then accounting, then the planner alias listed on the signage and the couple's event email. I copied Patricia. One sentence of cover stayed polite and firm. This is a courtesy consolidation, so facts are not scattered. I reread the addresses the way I used to reread numbers before sending deposits to the district bank. The screen brightened in my palm like a small, faithful lamp. Send. The phone gave a single hum as if it agreed. A server ghosted by with a tray. Champagne stems chimed softly. At the head table, laughter rose, thinned and flattened. I watched the screen instead of their faces. Banners began to stack. Received from Ira. Received from Dorian. Received from the event mailbox. The subject line was now common property, like a sign posted on a door no one could claim they hadn't seen. I placed the phone face down for a beat and let the thread breathe, then lifted it again. Ira's reply arrived first, courteous and exact. Attachments legible, timestamps clear. Thank you for consolidation. He added a line I'd been waiting for. Please meet me at the admin office. We can initiate internal media retention for security cameras and AV edit logs pending any formal request. No fuss, no theater, only a lane to walk. I smoothed my dress and moved along the carpet's river of vines toward the hallway. The door side shut behind me and the music softened to a friendly throb. In the office, the printer light glowed like a pilot flame. Ira opened a retention ticket in the hotel system, while I stood aside, hands on my folder. The form listed feeds and dates. I read over his shoulder without crowding. While he typed, Patricia's response landed on my phone with a tidy chime, a litigation hold letter, precise and narrow. Security cameras, lobby, ballroom service corridors, photo booth raw files and audit trails, AVQ sheets and edit marks, stage notes including MC cards. She asked that nothing be altered, relocated, cleaned, or repackaged. Preservation first. Explanation later. 30 days of preservation. Ira said, scanning the screen. Acknowledged in writing. He attached the hold to the event folio and replied, all with the confirmation. Dorian answered a minute later, received. Filing within folio, the kind of line that makes records stand straighter in their folders. The planner, alias, sent a clipped, noted. A follow-up tried to move the conversation to a smaller list. Patricia answered before I needed to, please keep all original recipients. Paper had found its spine and did not intend to bend. Back in the ballroom, the neutral placard stood at the gift station, clean and calm. Two guests approached, read it, and tucked their envelopes into the card box instead of scanning the QR. No argument, no scene. Just water, choosing the truer slope. Vera scanned the room as if checking light levels, but her eyes kept circling the side tech table where I'd been. I did not meet them. I have learned that sometimes mercy looks like not adding a single word. A cousin brushed my elbow on her way past and gave a small nod that could have meant anything. It was enough. I checked the time. 12:55 a.m. 30 minutes used like a carpenter measures edge mark cut check. I scrolled the thread one more time. Everything that mattered tonight sat where it should sit, labeled and time-stamped, protected against sudden edits and soft deletions. I breathed in, counted 3, breathed out. The band eased into a last slow number. A handful of couples swayed tired and pretty as figurines. I slid my phone into my bag and felt the slight weight settle against the folder. Years of balancing books had trained my hands to recognize when a column finally added up. By morning, the bill would find its owner, and my bank would find its guard. I set an alarm for 8, then set a second, a habit from the years when early buses ruled my house. I stood pressed the edge of the forgotten Crone badge, flat against my collarbone, and let it rest there like a witness. Some nights you raise a glass. Tonight I raised a record. The difference is simple. One evaporates. The other becomes history. I walked toward the exit with the same small dignity I'd walked in with, but not the same leverage. The room had not changed. The record had. I did not need them to say it. I paused at the door and looked back once. The band leader counted off a final bar. Silver forks chimed as staff reset the tables. Nothing in the room asked my permission, and nothing in my folder needed theirs. I have spent a lifetime turning quiet work into visible outcomes. Tonight repeated the lesson again. Document the truth, and let the truth perform without you. At 8:02, the ping woke the quiet in my kitchen. The subject line had teeth. Payment due, action required. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Graham Voss, family just as the contract said it would be. The CC field named the accountant and the manager from the hotel. I read it once, then again, letting the coffee cool. There it was. Black type, calm as a clerk. The balance due the deadline. The method. No exclamation points, no apology. The math of the night turned into morning. I saved the message to my evidence folder and wrote the time in my notebook. Truth likes daylight, and daylight was doing its job in my Edgewater kitchen. Now texts arrived the way summer storms do, thin at first, then hard enough to rattle the glass. Vera led with polish. Let's regroup. We can handle this offline. Graham followed with fog. This is being dramatized. You misunderstood the arrangement. Neither message said the word bill. Neither mentioned the timestamp at the bottom of the invoice. I set my phone on the kitchen table and watched the steam from my mug drift at half-mast. I forwarded the hotel email into the same evidence thread I had started last night, the one now carrying its own spine. No comment, no color. Forward sent, archived, yes. I have raised boys and led budgets. Both taught one rule: don't argue with a message, answer it with a plan. I wrote Patricia Billing, landed as contracted, and copied the thread. Then I opened my bank app and tapped Elder Exploitation Support. The form was plain. I filled it as I once filled field trip slips, carefully, legibly, only what mattered. Requested a same morning appointment, purpose review, and harden access. I did not explain my family. I did not explain my heart. I explained the risk. I attached the billing email in last night's log so the banker saw clocks, not claims. 9:15 a.m. Uptown. I closed app, took my folder locked door. Walter Drummond answered on the first ring. His voice had the weight of someone who reads terms each day. He verified me with the questions: no one can fake my first car, my old street, the teacher who wrote my reference when the school hired me. Then he asked what brought me in today. I told him the short version, the one without drama, a wedding where my access was narrowed, a cash fund routed through a media vendor, a directive, labeling me not on brand, and a bill now sitting where the contract said it should sit. I asked for high-sensitivity flags on all accounts review of any login attempts and a freeze on new external links without in-person notarized instruction. I said I was safe and I was not frightened, only prudent. He did not sell me services. He wrote down requests. The Uptown branch held the quiet of a library. Walter met me with a clipboard and courtesy that means rules will be followed. At his desk, he enabled no change without in-person notarized instruction, set a verbal passphrase, and restricted wires and ACH until I approved them at the window. We rotated passwords, swapped stale security questions, and removed an old power of attorney note from the year my husband was ill. I chose a lower ATM limit, set a travel lock, and asked for alerts on any profile edits. The audit showed no overnight attempts. He printed a debit card and opened a clean savings for reserves that would not touch bill pay rails. When I hesitated over the form, he let me read. By the time I signed, the day settled like a latch finding its notch. Walter said none of this accused anyone. It made me slow to move and quick to notify. I said slow and quick were fine with me. Okay, Walter filed an elder financial exploitation alert under state protocol. He attached a memo listing last night's documents, QR log cash fund screenshots, counsel's letter, and a photo of the MC's card. He printed and emailed a confirmation case, Nombre LFB EFA 274319, naming the investigator and the 30-day monitoring window. He gave me a case email and the rule to route any suspicious contact there without reply. What does the alert do? I asked. It puts my accounts in review. Anything unusual triggers a call before money moves. Attempts to add users or redirect statements are logged and tied to the file. I wrote the number in my notebook like student IDs on picture day. He also handed me a printed copy for my folder, because paper does not vanish when tempers do. I left with receipts flat in my folder and PDFs waiting in my inbox. On the bus north, I opened the thread from last night and added the files. No captions. The spine could speak. At Lawrence, a woman with a bouquet sat across from me. A ribbon slipped across the aisle. At my stop, I thanked the driver and let the cold air rinse the noise. In the elevator, the worry that used to follow me felt smaller than the key in my hand. I forwarded the updated thread to a backup address and filed it in a folder labeled After. Family texts landed and stayed unread. Not every bell deserves an answer. A stop later, 2 teenagers carried leftovers in white boxes laughing. Life went on, which was the point. Back in my kitchen, voicemails stacked like plates after a church supper. I wrote each time and number in my notebook, then set the phone face down. I rinsed my mug and left it to dry on a towel of lemons. The day was young, and it stood on my side. Now. Walter walked me to the notary window like a steady usher, then stepped back so I could speak for myself. Elena Moretti wore a navy blazer and the kind of reading chain that says she has saved many people from their own hurry. I slid my folder forward and told her a scanned authorization had conveniently surfaced after a wedding where I'd been labeled the forgotten Crone. I didn't raise my voice. I let dates and subject lines do it for me. She printed my specimen signatures from 2 prior notarized files and set them beside the wedding form. We'll compare habits, not hopes, she said, kind without softening it. Side by side, my name moved with the tremor I've earned. The small catch on the downstroke of the M, the closed the forward lean of S that tips like a willow in wind. On the scanned page, the S reclined, the A gaped the pressure, never let up. My hand can no longer hold a pen that hard for that long. Elena circled the mismatches. The Ravenswood clerk's satellite office smelled of toner and snow boots. A deputy behind plexiglass checked the footer on the scanned form against current templates. That revision code was retired last year. He said printing a confirmation. No speeches, only dates. My folder gained another spine. By early afternoon, I sat at a window desk in a cafe across from the bus stop phone, warm in my palm. Miles Ortega from the photo booth vendor answered on the second ring voice, careful but not afraid. Under the hold, he was free to describe logs. Gallery created admin user Kincaid Media admin, he read. At 5:22 p.m., review tag remove grandma shots. No deletions processed because of the notice. He sent the audit CSV. Numbers have a way of refusing to lie for long. Jules Tan from AV wrote next email spare as a cue sheet. He attached the change log, hot mic rehearsal chatter, captured at 6:41 p.m., flagged for trimming by Kincaid Media Edit. He confirmed the retention lock Ira ordered last night camera feeds, raw tracks card artifacts. I thanked him for doing his job the way I used to do mine slow exact without theater. The planner's alias tried to peel the vendors onto a side thread. Miles replied, "Pair hold all correspondence stays on the preserved chain." Jules echoed him. Ira acknowledged the scope from the hotel address. I did not pile on. Adults don't win arguments. They build records until arguments have nowhere to stand. Back home, I spread everything on my dining table. Oak nicked by years of school projects and winter puzzles. Left to right, notary memo template, version confirmation photo booth CSV AV cues. I labeled tabs, signatures, templates, media billing. Then I opened the scanned authorization again and held my pen over the crooked S that wasn't mine. If their story needed my hand, it should have learned how my hand actually writes. I made tea and watched the steam river up. The apartment was quiet enough to hear the kettle tick as it cooled. Across the street, a dog walker untangled 3 leashes with the patience of a surgeon. I breathed with the room. There is a difference between anger and clarity. Anger wants a scene. Clarity wants a copy. My phone buzzed. Patricia had only CC'd today, not led. She didn't need to. The thread had gathered its own spine. I saved each file to an external drive and wrote a paper index like I always do. Date, source, description, checksum. When you have been told you are forgettable, you learn to remember in 3 places. The afternoon thinned. I called the bus tracker and set the folder by the door. Evening would bring Birch Street a porch light that used to be mine to replace, and people who had confused branding with family. I would not perform. I would ask short questions and let short answers find their shape against dates. Before I left, I repinned the badge from last night to the inside of my coat, letters facing my heart. Not to wound it, to harden it. Let the outside of the coat be ordinary wool. Let the inside carry the name they chose for me until paper chose another. On the way down the stairs, I remembered Rowan at 5 trying to write his name without lifting the pencil. "You can pick it up," I'd told him, guiding his small hand. "You are allowed to rest." I smiled at the memory and locked my door twice the way Walter likes me to. The street smelled of lake wind and bakery sugar. My bus came with a sigh. I sat where I could watch the city pass like a ledger, line by line, block by block, adding up to something that would hold in the morning when the house on Birch had to answer to its own signatures. On the bus, I reread Elena's memo, her neat initials anchoring the margin like a paperclip. She wrote only what could be seen, a slant unlike my prior notarized signatures loops in Delaney that didn't match pressure too uniform for an arthritic hand. Facts, not verdicts. That is all I have ever asked from grown people. Across the aisle, a teenager tapped a beat on his backpack, oblivious to my small storm. Good. The world should go on while a lie shrinks. A stop before mine, a woman climbed aboard with flowers wrapped in brown paper. Water darkened the craft where stems had leaked. I thought of the towering centerpiece that had blocked my view, and who would dry those metal vases, who would wipe the ring left on a rented table. Work shows up as residue. So does truth. The city slid by bright and blunt as math. An email arrived with cheer it didn't deserve. "Your document is ready, 1426 Birch Ave." I tapped it with a forefinger that has signed for school lunches and winter coats not for tricks. The uncertified deed opened on my screen crisp as a pressed shirt. The grantee line read, "Voss Family Holdings, LLC Execution, dated 2 weeks ago, notarized out of state." My name stood nowhere near consent. I saved it to a folder labeled Deed, Chain, and watched the cursor blink like a metronome. Paper, first feelings. The index told on the hands that touched it. The instrument number sat inside a same-day mail-in batch filed by a third-party submitter. A fee breakdown matched bulk processing. I clipped the screen, captured the batch stamp, the pay line, the time, then attached it to the evidence thread I began at the hotel. A life can be rewritten in photos. Records require ink and sequence. I kept to sequence. The loop office hummed under fluorescent honesty. I took a B-72 ticket and waited with people filing papers. When my number blinked, I stepped to the counter. Renee Salcido greeted me with a tone that left room. I set my ID, a certified deed from years ago, bearing my real hand and the new PDF on the glass. I did not sign this, I said. I didn't add heat. Government rooms hold enough weather. Renee checked my identity, then set the images side by side. She explained what the recorder can and cannot do. They don't judge fraud. They preserve the chain. She could flag the suspect record, place a temporary administrative hold on any follow-on recordings, and accept an affidavit of non-consent from me for the index. Policy before panic. I nodded. Please proceed. I breathed once. She dialed title search and placed the call on speaker. Omar Patel answered, voice neat as a label maker. I read him the instrument number. He pulled the submitter account, noted a mismatch between the listed notary's jurisdiction and the state on the seal, and pointed out that the footer template didn't match the current revision. He opened a recorder case note, linking the instruments to my ID, and emailed a title chain snapshot CCing counsel. The word preserved landed in my inbox like a chair pulled. Renee drafted my affidavit of non-consent in daylight English. I did not execute or authorize any deed transfer of 1426 Birch Avenue. I signed the statement that is mine to sign and watched her stamp a fresh instrument number across the top. Minutes later, the online index showed a new line beneath the pretender. Affidavit of non-consent, Maris Delaney. Grantor of record. One sentence put me back in the public room I'd been asked to leave. A clerk leaned over to tell Renee that a family representative was on another line asking to correct a misunderstanding. Renee stayed neutral as stone. All correspondence must reference the instrument numbers. The hold and affidavit remain. I kept my tongue behind my teeth. Paper would say what needed saying, and paper doesn't stammer. I left with a recording receipt, the snapshot Omar sent, and Renee's case note ID tucked into my folder. Outside State Street was wind and noise, and people going home with their names intact. They curated images. I corrected the record. I pressed the folder to my coat and took the L north the rails, singing like a quiet verdict. At my desk, I read the deed again the way I used to check subtraction twice. Page 1, a grantor block trying to gather my history without my hand. Page 2, a notary seal whose county did not sit near Cook a commission number to verify tomorrow. The pagination showed 2 of 2, no riders attached. Whoever assembled it counted on blur, not scrutiny. The house on Birch carried more than shingles. Door frame pencil marks the squeak on the third stair winter light off the radiator. I stayed exact lot and block legal description, last clean deed. I added those numbers to the thread so each fact held the next. While the index refreshed, I sent Patricia affidavit recorded. Hold active. Case note linked. Snapshot attached. She replied with 3 words: received, preserved, acknowledged. The economy of her language matched the hour. On the L, I angled my folder and let the car rattle north. Past Belmont, the night got roomier. I pictured the maple at Birch catching lake wind and felt my breath settle where it had been riding high since the ballroom. At home, I opened the portal again to confirm the new line in the index. There it was, my sentence stitched to their filing like a hem that won't come loose. I downloaded the uncertified copy of the affidavit, added the time, and printed a small cover sheet so tomorrow's me would not need to dig. Voicemails waited, Graham measured and vague. Vera, bright as foil, let's not escalate. I saved both to the case thread without answering. When people want to barter with fog, they do it in phrases. I had moved the night into nouns. I washed my hands, turned the badge from the wedding face down in a drawer, and wrote a line for morning call. Notary commission. verify seal, request certified copies, ask Omar for submitter's mailing scan if allowed. Then I closed the notebook and sat long enough to count to 60 slowly. The apartment ticked the clock, the baseboard heater, the small ordinary heart that decided to keep its beat. By morning, their apology would arrive signed by optics, not conscience. The email came at 9:02 bright with bullet points and the kind of warmth that warms nothing. It used Graham's address and Vera's voice miscommunications, family narrative brand alignment. The sentences were centerpieces, balanced, scentless, easy to move. I saw her tells tidy diamond bullets a space before dashes verbs, hidden behind nouns, so blame never lands. At the bottom, a stray BCC glinted like a pin. It was an apology drafted for a crowd, not a mother. I finished my toast, rinsed the mug. The second paragraph offered satin terms. They would remove misleading artifacts, avoid further confusion, and make things right with a small check. And a dinner next week, cameras optional. A clause asked me to provide mutual misunderstandings in writing. That's the soft hinge of a hard door, the part you don't see until it closes on your hand. I opened my folder instead. The paper inside doesn't negotiate. Ink seldom does. On top lay the 1158 invoice. Beneath it, my affidavit of non-consent like, Cafe Clark sits between my bus stop and a florist that overwaters its hydrangeas. I took the corner table with my back to the wall and the aisle on my left old bookkeeper habits. Vera arrived unsmudged. Graham followed with pockets, heavy with silence. We hate that you felt excluded, she began. We want to move forward as a family, he added. I wrapped my hands around a cup of tea and let the heat mark my boundaries. Moving forward requires a map, I said. Maps prefer facts. I read their apology back to them, steady as a ledger. When I reached on brand, I let the words sit. Then I set 2 documents on the table edges, square the invoice with the tiny 1158 alive in its corner, and the affidavit's instrument number. I didn't slide them closer. You aren't negotiating with my feelings, I said. You're negotiating with the record. A spoon clinked somewhere. Sometimes the world provides the gavel. My counteroffer is simple, I said, taking a page of my own. First $25,000 within 72 hours to seed a scholarship at the Community Arts Center in my name. The custodian is independent. Your family has no say beyond the receipt. Second, a written acknowledgement to the venue and vendors. No deletions, no edits, preserve all materials until council releases the holds. Third, a private letter from you, Graham, no PR tone, stating plainly the help I gave and the years it cost. Vera's mouth drew like ribbon meeting a knot. That figure is significant, she said. I tipped the invoice so the staple caught the light. You're familiar with significant, I said. Graham asked, Does this buy forgiveness? It buys nothing? I answered, It funds someone else's beginning and closes this event with dignity. The barista wiped a nearby table. The room breathed. Vera measured the windows. I watched the steam lift from my tea like a metronome. We'll review with counsel, Graham said. Of course, I answered. I'll send the terms within the hour, copying counsel the venue and the vendors so no one misremembers. I left the cafe without touching their draft. They could keep the script it wrote in on. At home, I wrote the terms as sentences, not talking points, escrow instructions, wire details to the center's fiscal sponsor, exact acknowledgement language, and one required line for Graham's letter. I erased my mother's presence and benefited from her labor. No synonyms. I attached the draft, kept the existing thread so the spine stayed unbroken, set the subject to resolution terms scholarship and record integrity, and gave the deadline 72 hours. I read it aloud slow as bedtime stories. Send. The sound was polite for something that weighed so much. Outside, a gull argued with the wind. I slid my badge, the one that named me the forgotten Crone, under the scholarship paragraph, where it could rest beneath something that might outlive it. They wanted a photo. I wanted a fact that would keep teaching. I brewed chamomile and wrote a name on a note card to see if it fit in ink, the Delaney Quiet Power Fund. It looked like something I would have believed in even if I had never needed it. Replies began to land like careful footsteps. The venue acknowledged receipt. The vendors replied, preserving as instructed. Patricia thanked me for keeping the chain intact and reminded everyone that archival integrity was part of the piece I had offered, not a bargaining chip. I stood at the window above Clark and counted buses, the 22, the 36, the 22 again. My phone stayed face down on the table. When people want you to forget, they speak quickly. When records do their work, they don't raise their voice. I wrote 3 sentences on a yellow sheet and tucked it into the folder's front pocket. No meetings without paper. No promises without dates. No apologies without verbs. Then I dated the page. In the corner, I drew a small box and shaded it in my own checkbox, a private vote. I am not angry in the way they expect. Anger burns down rooms. I prefer lights that stay on. If the scholarship is funded, a teenager will buy paint, and an old woman I do not know will nod because a room looks brighter. That is a no. Before noon, I stacked the printout, smoothed the staple, and closed the folder. At last, the paper held the last word indeed. If they wanted a photo, they could fund a picture that outlived all of us. The bank alert arrived at 9:37 a.m., a polite chime that set my kitchen clock walking faster. Incoming wire 25,000, even memo line Delaney Art Scholarship seed. I read the digits twice, then saved the PDF receipt to the folder that had grown a spine of its own. I forwarded a copy to the escrow email at the Community Arts Center with a short note funds per term sheet. Please confirm restricted deposit. I did not add a smiley or a thank you paragraph. Paper didn't need my warmth to do its work. The phone rang before the kettle clicked off. The treasurer's voice was careful and competent. She confirmed the wire had landed in the restricted escrow, gave me a routing memo number, and promised a 1-page acknowledgement by noon. When the email arrived, I printed it and slid it behind the bank receipt. 2 pages crisp and unsentimental, said more for me than any speech ever could. A new subject line appeared from Graham Family Acknowledgement Draft. I took a breath before opening it. The letter thanked me for my support, described the wedding as a miscommunication of intentions, and praised the scholarship as a beautiful way to move forward as a family. It was written in Vera's showroom voice, arranged in neat bullet points I recognized from her press kits. It also omitted the one sentence I had required. We acknowledge Maris's financial support and role in Rowan's upbringing. I opened my term sheet and highlighted the missing line. Then I replied with 13 words. The omission nullifies compliance with item 3. Please restore the sentence. I attached the term sheet again because people who forget words often forget attachments too. Vera wrote back quickly, smoothing the air with phrases that sounded like diffuser steam. Would I accept standing by us through seasons instead of financial support? Could we soften role in Rowan's upbringing to presence in Rowan's life? I let the screen cool, then pasted 3 instrument numbers below my answer. The affidavit recorded at the recorder's office yesterday, the litigation hold ticket at the hotel, and the 1158 invoice packet. I wrote, "We are not negotiating feelings. We are acknowledging facts." A reply landed from the venue thread I had kept alive since the night of the wedding. Dorian the accountant wrote that under the active preservation window, the venue would not authorize any post-event deletions or edits, and that vendor logs and cue sheets would remain intact. Ira added a single paragraph from policy that said the same thing with hotel grammar. No one argued. The chain itself felt like a door clicking into place. I opened Graham's PDF again and redlined a single sentence back into it exactly as my terms required. Beneath the closing, I added a lone signature line for my son, not a byline for public relations. My message said, please sign and circulate this exact version to the preserved recipients within 24 hours. Upon receipt, I will authorize the center to announce the scholarship quietly to its applicants. Until then, the escrow remains restricted. Short nouns, short verbs. Clocks prefer them. The phone rang. Graham cleared his throat the way he used to before reading in school. He said the line was hard to see on paper. I told him it had been hard to live in private. We both let the silence do its full minute of work. He said he understood. I answered that understanding would look like ink. I made tea and waited without pacing. Messages stacked. Vera floated alternatives with more perfume and less meaning. I answered with the same 3 numbers and the same sentence. Dorian forwarded a second policy note about audit trails. Ira acknowledged. The center's treasurer sent a courteous reminder that escrow funds could not be touched without my release. Everyone spoke like adults because the paper made us. By mid-afternoon, the winter light washed across my desk and turned the folder tabs to small flags. I printed the wire memo, the routing acknowledgement, and my redlined letter, and filed them in the sections I had labeled in pencil, scholarship, policy acknowledgement. I wrote the date on a sticky note and pressed it to the folder's edge. The phone stayed quiet for an hour as if the day itself were choosing a side. At 4:31 p.m., a final email arrived from Graham. No subject flourish. The PDF was the same as my red line. The sentence sat where it belonged, plain and heavy as a brick. There was his signature, not a digital stamp, but the uneven ink I knew from birthday cards and permission slips. I felt my shoulders loosen by a notch I hadn't admitted was there. I thanked him with one line received. I did not add anything about forgiveness. Records do not ask for it. I forwarded the signed letter to the venue thread and to the Community Arts Center, authorizing the center to move from escrow to public notice at their discretion. Then I closed the folder and left it on the desk, its weight a simple fact like the dusk gathering outside my window. I stood at the sink and watched the steam lift from the mug. I thought about the sentence not as a victory, but as a shelf, finally fixed to the wall it would hold what came next. I set the mug down and let the quiet settle where noise used to live. Stay. If the record could carry one truth, it would be this line or none. At 9:12 a.m., the email arrived like a door clicking open. Graham's signature sat under the line he had avoided. We acknowledge Maris's financial support and her role in Rowan's upbringing. The timestamp was neat, the PDF margin square. I printed 2 copies, slid one into the front pocket of my folder, and answered with a single word, received, then set the kettle on. The steam rose without ceremony, which felt right. Truth didn't need trumpets, it just needed ink that stayed. By late morning, I walked to the Community Arts Center in Andersonville, the folder tucked against my ribs. The director had arranged a simple gathering, folding chairs, a scuffed lectern, a pot of coffee giving off caramel air. No backdrop, no logo wall, no hired lenses. She confirmed the order policy acknowledgments, scholarship announcement, then the reading. I chose a seat at the aisle back to the wall where my habit of observing could rest and simply witness. People filed in quietly, students' neighbors, a teacher on lunch break. The director opened with thanks to neighbors and donors, then lifted 2 short letters. The first from Ira at the hotel affirmed that the event records were preserved and would remain unaltered through the window previously noticed. Requests to edit or delete would be archived and declined. The second from Dorian in accounting confirmed the same at the folio-level invoices, cue sheets, logs, and artifacts retained exactly as they were generated. Read aloud policy sounded less like a warning and more like a promise. People nodded, some with eyes closed, as if a boundary had finally held. Then the scholarship found its name. The Maris Delaney Arts Scholarship. The director said, smiling the small, honest smile of someone who signs checks with care. Criteria appeared on a handout. Adult learners financial need a short piece of work that shows persistence more than polish. The treasurer stepped forward to confirm escrow and the first award cycle in spring. No one clapped early. When applause came, it felt like wood and breath, the sound of chairs and hands in a room that did not need to prove anything. Graham stepped to the lectern with the signed page. He did not look at me first, and I did not ask him to. He unfolded the paper, cleared his throat, and read the sentence in a steady voice. We acknowledge Maris's financial support and her role in Rowan's upbringing. No metaphor, no weather around it. Just the line clean and standing. A hush, held not uncomfortable, simply full. He finished the letter exactly as agreed. Behind him, Vera stood still, neither arranging nor interrupting. A student in the second row raised a hand and asked how to apply. The director pointed to the bulletin board where the form was pinned with blue tape. I added that a portfolio can be a folder of attempts, not a museum. The student grinned and wrote that down. Another attendee asked whether the scholarship required an essay about hardship. Only about effort, the director said. I loved her for that. After the program, people came forward not to gush, but to share small truths. A retired bus driver wanting to learn watercolor, a grandmother who wrote poems in the Notes app on her phone, a nurse who used her break to sketch the river. Graham thanked the director and without fanfare began stacking chairs. When he reached my row, he paused. "Mom," he said, not as an announcement, not as a plea. I touched the edge of the signed page and nodded. "Help the treasurer carry the box," I said. He did. Vera approached as the room thinned. "Thank you for keeping it local," she said carefully. "Local is where life happens," I answered, and let the silence be kind. There are apologies you can live without once the ledger is balanced. We walked out at dusk. Clark Street smelled like rain and bread. I carried an envelope that now held receipts more than wounds the signed letter, the escrow. Confirmation the policy statements folded once and crisp. The folder felt lighter in my hands because some of those pages now lived on other desks in the archive at the center in the county's chain. Paper, when set in the right places, becomes furniture. You can rest on it. At my corner, I turned north. Porch lights blinked on. A dog barked twice and then remembered he knew the evening. I passed the window of a dance studio where a woman my age practiced a slow turn, counting under her breath. I thought of the night they tagged me, forgotten how the plastic edge scratched my collarbone each time I breathed, and how I had chosen not to hide it. It had marked a page more than it had marked me. At home, I slid the second copy of the signed letter under the magnet shaped like a lighthouse. I made tea and stood at the sink while the kettle whispered. There would be more ordinary days and a few harder ones. Records do not dry every river. But the story had moved from being performed to being kept. That is the difference that lets a person sleep. Before the light went fully blue, I wrote the scholarship name on a sticky note and pressed it into my planner on the week the applications open. I do not need to be at the selection meeting. It will be enough to sit in the back next spring and watch a stranger's hands shake a little as they read a thank you and talk about what they will try next. It sufficed. They tagged me forgotten. The record learned my name. After everything, here's what I'd pass on. Dignity isn't silence. It's choosing when and how to speak. Keep receipts, set boundaries, and let paper carry the truth when hearts won't. If family love turns into optics, redirect it into purpose. You're not forgotten if the record knows your name. What would you have done differently in my shoes? Have you ever turned a slight into a scholarship, a wound into work? If this story moved, you tap subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Drop a 1, or tell me where you're watching from, if it didn't land. Say why. Start where you are. Boundaries are love with a spine. Begin today firmly.